Hey guys, welcome to this video where we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're gonna throw it back today and do a review and setup on a unit that I used to use when I would tournament fish. So I figured we're gonna throw it back, get the old tournament shirt out, and show you guys one of my favorite units Lowrance has ever made, the Lowrance LCX 27c. Now, if you don't have an LCX 27, you might have one of the other ones, like an LCX 15, LCX 25, LCX 104, a 113. All of those units will basically be covered in this to some extent, so this information will be for you as well. So we're gonna go through the settings, some information on it, some troubleshooting on it, a whole bunch of different things that you're gonna wanna take a look at if you have one of these on your boat, or hey, if you just wanna go back and relive what it was like using these units, this video is gonna be for you. Doesn't that alarm sound bring back some memories for you? Okay, let's just get right into it with this LCX 27c. We got our warning on the screen. You can hit exit. There's no GPS antenna plugged in, so we get the GPS not responding message. And this was a very common message you may have gotten even when a GPS module was plugged in. You'll be able to go to the end of the video where I'm gonna have some troubleshooting, talk about a few reasons why you might get this message. Keypad's a little flaky on this unit, so please bear with me with that. Just to show you quickly too, you have your menu here, which pertains to the screen you're on. Your second menu comes by hitting menu twice. We're gonna go down to sound, and we're gonna turn the key press sounds off, just so that doesn't annoy us for the rest of the video. And I'll turn the simulator on as well. You know, I said these were one of my favorite units Lowrance ever made, and reason why is they responded so quick through the menu system. So once you got good at using them, it was basically just muscle memory, you know, to go to the page you needed to go to. And I mean, you could get there really quick. Like if you wanted to check the software version, there it is in a few seconds. I'm at version 2.4. Even today, you try and do that on some of the faster units, and definitely takes a little bit longer than that. These ones, for a keypad unit, the menu was laid out extremely well. That's one reason I like them so much. Now you're gonna see also these yellow boxes come up, and they basically just tell you what the feature does. If you don't like them, you can go into system settings and pop-up help. So as you can see, if we deselect this option, it will turn off pop-up help. So that won't come up anymore. I'm gonna keep it off for the video just so you guys can see all the options in the screen. It's not gonna cover anything. So we're gonna go to our pages menu, where you can see we have this bar across the top that'll let you go to the different pages. So our first page we have is the satellite page. So when you have a GPS antenna hooked up, that will tell you what your satellite status is. And then there's a custom gauges page too. So this unit does have NMEA 2000, where you could put some engine data on here from the compatible outboards of the time. I did it with a 2005 Yamaha HPDI, and it worked awesome. So our navigation screen here, we have all of our digital numbers, and then our highway type screen. And later on an update, they came out with the highway screen with the Sonar screen. Our mapping screen, we had full map, digital map with the info on the side, 2 position formats. Not really sure why they did that. 2 maps, so you could have one zoomed in, one zoomed out. Map with Sonar, which was a very common one, and then map with custom pages. And then Sonar, pretty much same thing. Full chart, split zoom, split frequency, digital data, flash graph, which was your flasher, and then Sonar with gauges. And if you had a radar, same thing there again, a whole bunch of different split screens with the radar. And just while we're here, we'll talk about the radar a little bit. So these units use the LRA series of radars, which would plug in through a RIM module on the back of the units. They were quite a pain to deal with. They had several failures with them, and they weren't the greatest. They were just traditional magnetron radars made by a company called Coden for Lowrance. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend having a radar with one of these guys unless it was your only option at the time. So now on our split screen, which is a very common page people would use, one thing you need to know about these units, as you can see, we're zoomed in on our Sonar. Well, if I hit zoom out, all that's zooming out is my map. If you hit pages twice, this now highlights blue. We can zoom out there. Hit pages twice again. This is now blue, our active window, and we can zoom in on that map. Another thing we can do on a split screen, we get resize window. That will allow us to change the panel size. I would tend to always run my units like this, because I really didn't need a whole lot of sonar history, but I could see my full map. Now I have some old Sonar recordings from these units that I tried to use as the simulator file, but unfortunately the card I had, the smallest one, was a 4 GB micro SD in an adapter. And this unit, I think the max was about 2 GB and it's just not reading it. I could also be the card reader's defective, but I'm pretty sure 2 GB is the maximum card size. Okay, so as far as settings go on the unit, this is in factory settings right now. First thing I'm gonna do, we'll go down to Sonar features and we have fishing mode. Now this is available in all the units today as well. It really started on these LCX units. Shallow water is what you're going to want to use for bass fishing for the most part. Now the reason you do this first is every other option we change will now be set under this mode. So I'm going to go to manual mode, turn off my auto sensitivity. I'm also going to turn off my zoom bar, amplitude scope, which is like the flasher on this side of the screen you'll see when we exit back out. And then noise rejection, we're gonna turn that off. We're gonna leave surface clarity off. I prefer the white background, but you can pick any color you want. So this is how I would set up these units in a couple seconds, just like that, for any type of shallow water fishing like bass fishing. So this is our 200 kilohertz sonar. These use the HST WSBL transducer, or if you have the dual frequency, the 5200, it's the HST DFSBL transducer. You could also run the blue connector Airmar P66 on these if you do a lot of downrigging. And then there's a whole array of other transducers available for them as well. Sonar is the only thing you're gonna get. You're not gonna get side imaging, down imaging, no live sonar, nothing like that, just traditional two-dimensional sonar. So as far as setting it up goes, once we do the basic fishing mode setup, we have our sensitivity, which we can adjust as we need. And I always like to have that as high as possible, but not cluttering up the background. So as you can see, that's a little too high. We can just turn that down. Probably around there is where I would want it, where we're still getting good fish arches, a little speckling here and there, but not interfering with the fish arches. The next is our color line. 62 is really good. Anywhere in the 60s, as you turn that up, as you can see, you get more color in the bottom, so the harder the signal. In this case, the yellow is going to show up as the hardest signal, and the lower we go, the less we have of that. So with the color line, you're really just tuning the strength of the signal that you're seeing and basically selecting the color you want that to show as. Depth range, that will be set as we've already set it in manual mode, so for the sake of this, I'll just leave it at 60 because that way the simulator will run perfectly through this one. You also have the ability to do upper and lower limits. So right now we have 0 as our upper, 60 as our lower. So if you wanted to key in between 20 and 40, you could do 20 and 40, and then you'll just see that band. So that was really helpful if you did a lot of trolling. Stop chart was a feature they put on these mostly for bass fishermen fishing the deeper water. I use this all the time. You'd idle around looking for your structure and cover at the console, and then as soon as you would go up to fish at the front, you'd hit stop chart. That would disable the sonar on this one, so it wouldn't interfere with the one at the front of the boat. Then we have our chart speed. I would always have that set to 100%. As you turn it down, the chart just goes too slow. So 100% is where I would always leave that on these units. The depth cursor is the next feature, and that would just basically be a cursor line you could bring down and see that that fish is at just about 22 feet. You could use that anywhere, and you can see what I mean by how fast these units are. Just see how fast this cursor responds. Overlay data, just like what we have currently on our units. Basically just the same type of tree menu system where you can select the data that you want to have on your screen, and then you can also select the sizing of it back here. So we can adjust the water temperature however we like. We can change the sizing of it. You can also turn off the captions, which is something I would always do, just because that would then give you a little bit more real estate on the screen, so it'd get rid of the depth and the water temp there, something you don't need. Ping speed is next. I would normally leave it at 50. As you probably guessed, the screen was scrolling pretty quickly. I've never really found a use to go less than 50, but sometimes you would go up to 100 if you were vertically fishing, so a lot of drop shotting or vertical jigging. If you set it to 100, your screen would update quicker because it's sending the ping out at a higher rate. You would see all the current information in the amplitude scope here, and then it would draw the history on the screen. We also had the ability to log sonar chart data in here. As you can see, I don't have any cards in the unit, but you could set the quality down there and record your sonar logs to play back on a computer or to make your own charting through third-party software. We'll go to the split zoom chart here. One thing you'll notice is we can only go to 4 times zoom. So we're at 2 times, now we're at 4 times. and that's as far as we can go. Whereas today on the HDS units, you can go 8 times. And really, because of the chirp sonar that's available on the HDS units, you need to be able to zoom in much more than just 4 times like we could on these units. Everything nowadays with chirp appears so much smaller. So on our map screen here, you can zoom in and zoom out. On our menu, we got find distance. That will tell us how far away an object is from us. Find streets, if you had some of the map create software, that would allow you to utilize that. Map orientation, you'd always want to go to track up, regardless of the way the boat is facing, is always pointing towards the top of the screen. Auto zoom, that would be something if you were running a route, it would zoom in to always keep you and your waypoint on the screen. As we got closer, it would zoom in. So if you notice your GPS always zooming in, that would be one thing to check. Overlay data, same as on the Sonar page. Now map data, you can set your detail level here. You can have pop-up map information. I would always turn that off. Track line extension, same thing as what we have on the new units. There you can see the track line extension extending out. So the track line extension was something I would use a lot when we were fishing on Lake Erie, dragging tubes. You could see if based on that line, you would be hitting your waypoints. If you were off it a bit, you could readjust before your drift started, and you would just let your boat rest for a minute or two before setting up. That would show you that you're on the right drift. You can put the lat long grid on, range rings, which would be circular rings that go out from around the boat. Fill water with white rather than blue. You could do that. Map boundaries would be like all the red boxes that are around the navionics charts. You can go in here. If we had a navionics chart in, we'd see navionics, so you could select that. Presentation mode, US mode is like the US charts. International mode is like all the other charts, like the Canadian CHS charts, for example. And then safety contours. These weren't the greatest because you had 5 meters or 10 meters, so it would basically just be the blue shading that you could select on the chart. Map categories drawn. So here you could turn off a lot of information that wasn't really useful to you. You could turn off highways, public lands, roads. You could turn that off. Sometimes that would help speed things up a little bit if you didn't need any of that, but you could leave on all the water information. Delete my icons. These units actually had waypoints and icons. So those are actually 2 different things on these units. This would allow you to delete all the icons you saved. I'm gonna go over here and show you about icons. So these were all your different icons. I really liked having waypoints and icons as separate. When they went to the HDS units, they got rid of that feature and it was just waypoints. We would save icons a lot just for fish catches rather than saving a waypoint. So waypoints would be saved for structure, icons for fish catches. So you could put an icon of the fish you caught there, then you could save a waypoint, but in this unit here, the waypoint key does not work. Time has had it with this unit apparently. Anyway, you would be able to save a waypoint. The waypoint would then have a number below it, and you could also change that to a name if you wanted to. So we can go into our second menu here and go through some of the things there. We had the ability to do screenshots on these units. We could adjust our contrast. They had different display modes as well. They even had the night view mode, high contrast, which I think that was the one I always used to use. Never really used the night mode too much. Sounds, which we kind of went into already. You can reduce the volume, and that was something I would always do just so people couldn't hear me saving waypoints. Transparency was kind of an interesting one. You could set the transparency of the menu, so as you can see, as I increase it, you can see more of the background, just like that. I always found it a little bit difficult to read what I was looking at if you had it on full transparency, but it was helpful if you were making changes. You could see what was going on in the background. So we got alarms as well, GPS alarms. You have your arrival, off course, and anchor alarm, and you can set the different distances you like there. Sonar alarms, shallow, deep, and zone alarms, and then fish alarm if you use the fish ID, which you shouldn't because it's so inaccurate. And then enemy A2000 alarms. So you'd be able to select different devices that may be connected. If you had a fluid level sensor, you could set an empty alarm. If it got below 10%, then you had 10% left in your tank. And it would also give you different alarms that were presently going off or have gone off. Route planning, you could go in and create a route, basically adding point to point in the GPS. It was a little bit tedious, but it could be done if you wanted to do that. Your trails, this is another area that I would always set up. Trail options, I would go to time. I'd set my update rate to 1 second from 3 seconds. So now every second it's updating. The other thing I would do is change my maximum points down to 9,999. And the reason I would do that is after 2,000 points, your trail would start to basically eat itself up. But if you had 9,000 points, it would run longer, so you wouldn't have to change it as often. You know, you can also change the color, which was nice. If you pre-fish in a tournament, you could use 3 colors for that. And then on tournament days, you could set some colors for that, just so you kind of had an idea of where you covered the different water at what time. In here also, we can set it's an active trail, so that means it will record our current position, or visible. So if you wanted to turn off some trails, you can do it in there as well. In our sonar setup here, we can select our transducer type. In this case, it was 200 kilohertz only. If you had a 50 only or a high power transducer, you could select those in there. We had a keel offset on these units, so you could set the true depth of the water based on how deep your transducer was in the water. Calibrate water speed, you could adjust the percentage for the paddle wheel you had on the back of the boat, and those things, if you ever had one, they were quite inaccurate. So you had that, and then you could also reset the water distance. Those would also record the distance that your boat had traveled based on the speed you had traveled, so you can reset that in there. So we go to our GPS setup now. You can initialize your GPS if you had a hard time getting a fix. Coordinate system, in here you could select the coordinate system that you wanted to use. You can select the map datum on these ones. WGS 84 and NAD 1927 are the most common ones. Now here are a couple things we should go over. I'm gonna do require WAS first. So if you check this box off and instantly lost your GPS position, that is because you now told the unit you are requiring the GPS antenna to get a WAS signal before it will show you a GPS signal. So you always wanted to have that off. Should you be in an area where WAS was really good, it would still pick it up and it would improve your GPS signal, but it would not require it. So that was something very important. Show WAS alarm, that's another one you'd want to have turned off, because every time the WAS goes in and out, you'd have an alarm on your screen, really annoying. Track smoothing, definitely turn that off. That is not something you're gonna want. The only time I think you would want that is if you were a pleasure boater using these units as a GPS only and you wanted to keep your track going, you know, fairly smoothly without a lot of detail when you're at rest. In a fishing application, if you're fishing a row of boat docks, let's say, with track smoothing on, it might just show you going across the screen like this. When you turn it off, it'll show you going in between each dock and give you much more accurate tracks. So that's something you'd want to have turned off from a fishing standpoint. In our system setup here, just like most units, I won't go into these in a lot of detail. You can set your units of measure for depth and temperature and all that. Set local time, communications port. Now this is for your NMEA 0183. You had 2 ports, and I believe these were RS-232 ports, and that's how you could connect to your radars as well, or VHF radios, autopilots, that type of thing. Reset options, you could select that. That'll default everything to factory settings. Simulators turns your simulator on. You can delete all your waypoints, so if you're selling one of these units, that might be something you'd want to do. Pop-up help, we've already talked about that. Hide GPS, hide radar features. If you didn't have a GPS, you were using this as fish finder only and didn't have a radar, you can turn those features on. And now I no longer have radar as an option in the menu there. And then you can go back and turn it back on should you ever get a radar, but I would highly recommend not. Set language, transfer my data. So you have to put a card in first, but if did have a working card in the unit, you're gonna have an option to load or to save. So to save the data, we're saving it from the internal memory to the card. If we have data on the card, we're gonna load the data, and that will go from the card to the internal memory on the unit. You can then check the free storage. If you fill this up, delete your tracks. That's the easiest way to get rid of that. And then software information. So we're version 2.4. I think there's a 2.5 available for these units, but it is a minimal update if I'm not mistaken. So we'll go to networking here next. So our bus setup, that is like our device list on the current unit. So it'll give you everything that's on your NMEA 2000 bus. It'll give you the diagnostics of it, and then also give you your Ethernet diagnostics. Fuel management, we could set how many tanks we had. So if we had a port starboard, we can go here to add a tank. We can fill our tank here. So we can tell the unit now we have a full tank, and it'll reset what we've used. We can then go here and reset our fuel logs as well. NMEA 2000 alarms, I think we already covered that in the alarms. Waypoint sharing and backlight synchronization were 2 options through NMEA 2000 on these units. So if we turned our backlight down on the front unit, it would turn it down on the back unit and vice versa. And this would also allow you to share waypoints between units. Sun moon calculator, well, you know what that is. Trip calculator would allow us to do things like see our current speed, average speed, and maximum speed. Always like the maximum speed, because when you're prop testing or just, you know, figuring out how the load works best on your boat, you could see what your actual maximum speed was. You can also keep time of distances. So if you're making a run for a tournament, you can have all that information in there. We had timers, basically count up, count down, and then an alarm clock. Alarm clock we would always use for tournaments just so we know when to get back on time. Browse files. We had cards in here. It would list all the files that are on that card. You can go through, manage those, and delete those. All right, so we'll just go over these units from a physical standpoint now. A couple of things on them. They use the MMC tray down here, or SD card tray. Like I say, I think it was 2 gigabytes was the maximum size you could use. They had the standard Lowrance keypad that we've all been used to. These ones too, though, would have kind of a positive touch to them. So you could really tell when you were pressing a key. The previous generation had a lot of problems with the keypads. With these ones, really did not run into that at all. These were one of the first units to have the Solar Max display on them, making the screen super easy to see in direct sunlight. They used a traditional gimbal style mount, had on the back a heatsink, which was much smaller than the previous generation, the LCX 25-26. As far as flush mounting these units go, you could do it. There was the threaded inserts on all 4 corners, which would allow you to flush mount these units into the dash as well. If you've owned a Lowrance unit since these units came out, you'll probably recognize these connectors. The Ethernet 5-pin connector is still the same that they're using on the HDS today. The power connector is exactly the same for the power ports. They're red in color today, but they are still the same. The only difference is the NMEA 0183. They were RS-232, they're now RS-422, so there's some changes there if you're connecting to any external device like an autopilot or VHF. Our NMEA 2000 port here, these ones were red, the ones today are black, but the pinout is exactly the same, and our Sonar port is still the same. You can actually use a transducer from an LCX 15 on these as well, which came out in 2001, and that's the same transducer you could use today on an HDS Live unit. You would need an adapter, but it would still work. One other thing on these units, you could get like a little screwdriver or your finger in here and pop out this center bezel that was over the screen. Now the reason you could take this out was because on the previous generation, which shared the same housing, the LCX 16CI, the LCX 15CI, and even the LCX 15CT, if you ever remember that one, those ones would allow you to put a sunshade, which is basically just a cone on them. They had screens that were very difficult to read in the sunlight, no Solar Max displays on those ones, and that would help a little bit, but it stuck out, you know, that far, was pretty ugly, and if it wasn't snapped in, you would lose it pretty quick if you went through any boat wakes. So this was the base model, the LCX 27c. There was also a 37c and a 112c. The 27 was a 6.54 inch screen, 37 was an 8.4 inch, and the 112 was a 10.4 inch screen. All the units were exactly the same, however, it was just the screen size that was different. There was also an LCX 28 variation, 38, and 113 variation. Those also all had the letters HD behind them. For example, the LCX 38C HD. Most people thought that meant high definition. It had nothing to do with high definition. All it meant was there was a hard drive, HD hard drive was in the unit. That had all the nautic path charting and fishing hotspots charting that Lowrance had for that time, was preloaded to the unit's memory in that hard drive, so you could also put the SD cards in with the navionics charting. So you'd have the base map, the hotspots, the nautic path, and a navionics chart to choose your mapping from. So the power button also doubled as the backlight. You could turn that all the way up or just kind of in between where we've had it. You had zoom in, zoom out. If you hit those together, it'll start a man overboard. One other thing on these units, if you were panning around the map with the cursor and you hit exit by mistake, hitting it exit again will get the cursor back up to where you last had it. Hit exit again, it takes you back to the boat, just like that. Okay, so now we're gonna take a look at some common issues that people would have with these that could be troubleshot fairly easily when there was actually no issue with the unit whatsoever. First one is I can't see my screen in sunlight. And the reason why is these are color illuminated screens. So they require the backlight to be on at all times, just like units today. But back then, these units were competing against units that were grayscale units, and they actually didn't require the backlight to be on. The backlight was turned on in low light conditions. It's not the case with these. So what would happen oftentimes is either the backlight goes out and your unit's toast, or you just have the backlight turned down. Most commonly through the power key. So you can just cycle through the power key to get you back to the backlight level you want to be at. This was probably the most dreaded of all messages to get with these units. GPS module not responding. The reason this message would come up is because your GPS antenna was dead, you had a bad connection somewhere, and there were so many ways that these could have been connected through Enemy A2000, or most commonly, you did not connect the Enemy A2000 power source, or the fuse blew in the Enemy A2000 power source. This was tricky because there was no dedicated Enemy A2000 power source on the network. It was on the power cord for the unit. So these use a PC26BL, which is no longer available. It's now called a PC27BL. That has a thicker power cord with a red and black wire to go power up the unit, and a second smaller one which also has a silver wire in it, which is your Enemy A2000 power, which supplies power 12 volts to the Enemy A2000 network. That power cord, if the fuse was blown or it was not connected, would not send 12 volts to the GPS antenna, and you'd get this message. On the Sonar side of it, there weren't really a whole lot of issues that you'd run into with these units. The most common one would be your depth locking up at 2.1, 2.4, 1.3 feet when you're in water that was deeper than that. So if right now we had this lock up at 2.1, but as you can see, we're in like 40 feet of water, that would be an indication that your transducer has gone. So you definitely would be, first place to look would be a transducer. But other than that, there weren't too many issues with these units sonar-wise. Now, one problem you might run into on these units is just your screen basically looking like this. This was something that there was actually a physical problem with the unit. You couldn't do anything about it. The unit is toast, and unfortunately nothing you can do to bring this back. Okay, if you've made it this far into the video, 25 minutes or so in, you deserve to see the secret screens. So the first one is just on your map screen. If you hit exit, I believe 3 times, it'll bring up a speedometer and odometer full screen, and hit exit again, and that'll get you back out. The next screen I'm going to show you is a diagnostic screen by pressing the down arrow and power at the same time. So press the down arrow, press and hold power. Okay, and you'll come to this test screen here. You're able to change contrast there. You can see that changing, make some adjustments that way. We have a few different screens here just to test the different colors, check pixels, that type of stuff. We hit the exit key, brings us to this where we can test our keypad. And I showed you earlier the waypoint key wasn't working, so you can see if I hit zoom in, it works. Waypoint does not work. Hit exit again, it goes to our audio volume. This is like a master volume, so you can adjust that in here. I wouldn't really recommend doing that. I'd recommend doing that in the menu on the unit. This test here, this is our Sonar test, 200 kilohertz tuning. If your transducer is perfectly parallel with the bottom and you're in 10 feet of water, you see echoes based on the depth. You should get a reading consistently at the depth of the water, and then double the depth of the water and triple and so on. The more you get, the better it is. From what I remember, you want the echo around 70, and that would tell you you have a good transducer. In here as well, you can use the down arrow to bring you to 50 kilohertz. It'll bring you to this screen with the max sensitivity set at 100. That's 68% mid-range. So you can kind of just get an idea of how the unit is performing. If you had a transducer connected, you'd get this. We're getting our voltage reading because that's really the only sensor that's working. Okay, and then we can come back to this screen, hit exit. Serial ports, so this is your NMEA 0183. Don't have anything connected, so there's nothing there. And these test screens here are going to be, I believe it is for Ethernet. Could be for your 0183 as well. That last screen we looked at was in fact your NMEA 0183. This is your Ethernet. And again, I don't have anything connected to that, but you can get your IP address, your MAC address, all that stuff in there. I think that's all you can do on that screen. You have your card slots to see if anything's working, and then your model information there. Next thing I want to show you is a hard reset. That's going to be holding zoom in and zoom out and pressing power. So press both of those in, press and hold power, and allow the unit to boot up. All right, and the way you can tell that that worked is you'll be back at the first option as if you turn the unit on, and all your waypoints will be gone. So this will delete waypoints, icons, routes, and trails, and any setting you've put in this. This will wipe the unit right back to factory settings. So this would be good if you had a software glitch in the unit that you couldn't figure out. That would be one way to get it back. For instance, if you hit the menu key and hit menu again and you didn't get this second page come up, a hard reset would likely solve that problem. Next reset I'm going to show you is the pages key and power key. This is a soft reset. This will not delete your waypoints, so any problems you're having, this is probably the best thing to do at first and see if this solves the problem for you. So just like the hard reset, the way you'll know that worked is it'll bring this menu up again. Your waypoints, trails, icons, routes, they'll still be there, but any other setting you've made will be gone. One of the reasons these were my favorite units is they were just so crisp and clear, so easy to see what you were looking at. Now this was before chirp sonar, but they were extremely clear for what they were back then. So easy to see, so easy to navigate through. Definitely one of the best units Lowrance ever made. Thanks for joining me today, taking a look back at, in my opinion, one of the best units Lowrance has ever made. I'm really thankful that I got a chance to use these units. I've caught so many fish by looking at them on those screens, dropping down and catching them. So hopefully you have too. I wanna know in the comments as well, guys, are you still using an LCX? Do you have one on your boat? Which one was your favorite? Let me know in the comments. And also, how do you feel they compare to the new units today?